Hey, what's going on? It's Stephen Kramer Glickman from the TV show Big Time Rush on Nickelodeon. And right here with me is Matt Walker.
Hello, I'm Matt Walker, and you're listening to the Man Cave Chronicles podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Man Cave Chronicles.
Welcome to the party, pal!
You're my boy, Blue!
Yo, Adrian!
A podcast with interviews of amazing guests from the world of pop culture.
Oh, yeah!
TV.
Nice!
Movies.
Oh, I love the movies!
Comedy and more. From deep inside the Man Cave, your host, Elias.
Stephen, Matt, welcome to the cave, and thank you for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Hey, thanks for having us.
How are you guys? What's new with you?
Hanging out at home, like everyone, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
How's the whole quarantine life treating you? What have you guys been doing with that?
I've been
been
cooking
okay.
and baking.
Oh, yeah, Matt can cook. Matt's a very good cook. I'm not allowed to use most of the appliances in the kitchen. So.
There you go. So, everybody knows you from the Nighttime Show podcast, which, by the way, it's great. I've been subscribing to that podcast for over a year now. I've been listening to it. It's great. But I want the listeners to get to know you guys a little more about you. Let's start off with Steve. Steve, where are you originally from?
I'm originally from London, Ontario, Canada. Grew up in San Diego and been in Los Angeles since mostly since the mid-90s, I guess.
Where was your favorite part of living at?
In living in LA.
That's your favorite spot out of all the places you lived?
LA is probably my favorite place that I've lived just because it's a very ridiculous place to live. It's you have a lot of strange run-ins, here, which it has provided a lot of great guests for our show over the last 4 or 5 years. So, I love living in LA. It is a wonderful and bizarre place.
There you go. How about you, Matt?
I grew up in Southern California, and then I spent 5 years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania when I was in college. And then that's where I learned that winter sucks, because you don't learn that growing up in Los Angeles. So I came back as soon as it was possible for me to come back, and I refuse to live anywhere else now.
I'm from the East Coast, so I know all about those winters.
I was going to say, if I ever see snow again in person, it is far too soon. I don't know what the hell anybody puts up with that. Like, you don't have to live there, You can move somewhere where it doesn't do that.
That's right.
Yeah, I think when you're living in LA, the winter is like, oh, I get to wear that sweatshirt once a year. Like this is the one time a year I get to wear a hoodie sweatshirt with my favorite, Star Wars character on it or something. And then you go to the East Coast, you go to where it's cold, and you go and you bring your hoodies, you think you're set, and you get there and it's like, oh, no, snowsuit.
You're right about it.
And also, I haven't owned an umbrella in 25 years.
That's awesome. Funny thing is, one of my closest friends moved to Florida, 15 years ago, because we're from Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts, and as soon as he got down there, he settled in everything. Winter rolled around, and, down there where he lives in Jacksonville, the coldest it gets is 55, 56. He goes, I'm watching people put jackets on, and I'm sitting here with a short sleeve still, because I used to 55 degrees in Massachusetts. It's nice. And then you go down to Florida, it's opposite.
Yeah.
So it's they can't...
Yeah, 55. I'm in long underwear and 3 layers of clothing on top of that for 55.
Oh, my God. Yeah, the only thing that I enjoyed about the winter or cold is like I went out to the Sundance Film Festival a couple years ago and I got to wear a giant fur coat, like a fake fur coat, but a fur coat. And I now have this fur coat in my closet. There's never going to be another time to wear it.
It looks like you hunted down Chewbacca and turned him into a coat, is what that thing looks like.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I look like a bear. It's great.
So you guys have done stand-up comedy. Like, when did you first realize that you guys can make people laugh and you wanted to get into the comedy?
Well, I've been doing it for 17 years. Glickman, you've been doing it for about 15, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we both started pretty early on at a bowling alley in the San Fernando Valley area of Southern California,
Very classic.
where they used to have a comedy show. And that's where I met Steven. He was coming through town, traveling with a musical that was the sequel to Fiddler on the Roof. Highly successful play. And he came to see a show that I was hosting there at this bowling alley in Canoga Park when I was brand new to comedy. It wasn't any good. And he decided that he wanted to try. So, like, he came by a couple times and then he started doing it. And then that's how we became friends. And we've been doing that for years. And I never thought, I always enjoyed watching comedy, but I never thought about becoming a comedian until after I'd done it. Because I was doing some stuff on the radio and I thought, taking a comedy class would be a fun thing to do over a summer to help with doing the radio. And I showed up to this class, and the guy told me, come back next week with 1 minute of jokes. So I did that because how hard is that? And I did my 1 minute jokes in class. And he said, okay, I run a show on Tuesday. You're going to come do your minute of jokes at the show. And I was like, I've been here twice. And he's like, just trust me. So I went and I did it. And then within like 3 weeks, I was doing 4 open mics a week. Once I did it, I was like, oh, that's what I need to do.
So, like, you said you said you enjoy watching comedy first. Like, who were, like, some of your favorite comics?
Growing up, my favorite comic was Craig Shoemaker. He was always my favorite.
What?
I loved Sam Kinison.
Are you serious?
I loved Craig Shoemaker. Yeah, seriously. the whole Love Master bit back in the day was my favorite thing when I was in high school. But, I watched, the people who were big when I was in high school was, Dice and Kinison and, Seinfeld back before the show. Dennis Wolfberg was a great comic who I loved, who doesn't get enough credit. Just lots of people in the era of the late 80s. I was a big stand-up comedy fan at the time, and I'd watch a lot on TV, and I wasn't old enough to go to any of the clubs. So I just watch all the Evening at the Improvs, and saw everyone that became big or was big at that time. And, I just enjoyed all kinds of styles of comedy at the time.
How about you, Steven?
We need some more Dennis Wolfberg merch, don't we?
Dennis Wolfberg was so good. I mean, it's so sad that he died in, like 98 or something like that. He died a long time ago, but he was a great comic.
Shark Attack.
Yeah.
Very good.
How about you, Steven? Which comics did you enjoy?
Well, like,
not Craig Shoemaker. That's why I can tell by that answer.
What's that? What'd you say?
I said it's going to be not Craig Shoemaker.
No. My favorite stand-ups growing up were probably Carlin. I had 4 albums when I was 13, 14 years old. Four stand-up albums that my mom gave me. I had Pauly Shore's album, where he's like jumping in the air, which was ridiculous. And I had No Cure for Cancer, Dennis Leary's album. I had George Carlin's Live from New Jersey, and I had Eddie Murphy Delirious. Those were the 4 that I listened to until they were, till I knew every word and was kind of a little obsessive about those guys. And then I kind of moved on from there to when I found out that Bobcat Goldthwait was a stand-up comedian, because I just watched him in stuff like, like Police Academy and Scrooged. Then I wanted to watch, his stuff. He was very dirty and drug fueled, and it was a whole different thing. And then there were guys like Richard Jenney that I thought were really funny, rest in peace. And there was a show called Lounge Lizards
Yeah, Comedy Central.
That was on Comedy Central.
Yeah.
And one of the saddest things growing up was in our little neighborhood. We had the comedy in San Diego. We had the Comedy Channel on our cable box, and then it went from Comedy Channel to Comedy Central, and it was so great. We'd have Dr. Katz, and we'd have all these great shows, and then our cable company got into a fight with Viacom, and they lost Comedy Central and instead replaced the channel with Animal Planet. And I was so angry and there was no internet like where you could go and watch these shows. So it's just, that's the end of enjoying watching stand-up, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
so I'd watch it on late night, but that was really about it. Like that kind of.
Like I didn't have cable when I was a kid, so I used to just watch. They had these a couple shows in syndication I would watch. So like there was Friday Night, which ultimately became a music video show, but when it first came on, it was stand-up. That I forget who the first host was. Henry Cho hosted it later on, but they used to have a lot of stand-up comedy on there. And then there was Evening at the Improv would be on. Like I'd watch the football games from my high school, and then I'd come home and they have stand-up shows on at like 1 a.m. So I would just stay up really late and watch stand-up late at night when I was in high school.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny how like the comedy world has just gone even huge now compared to what it was.
It's grown and imploded and grown and imploded over and over again, and who knows which cycle we're in now.
Yeah. Where do you think it is right now? Where would you say?
I mean, now during this?
Right now, there's nothing.
Right,
so I think right now that this lockdown is probably going to cause the closure of some venues and cause a lot of aspiring comedians to quit. I think that's sort of going to be the natural end result. However, when shows start back up again, I think there is going to be an audience of people that are desperate to go to something that's not in their house. And I think comedy clubs will be able to open with smaller crowds when you can't go to concerts and you can't go to packed bars and you can't go to sporting events. So I think there's going to be a window of opportunity for us to gain a bunch of stand-up comedy fans from people who haven't gone to clubs in years or who never thought about going to comedy clubs. But I think they'll be one of the things that's open for people to do. And I think we'll have a chance to maybe grab some fans of stand-up comedy that we might otherwise not have had because they would be going to a Dodger game instead of spending their Friday night at the Improv.
Yeah.
I think they'll be looking for somewhere to go, and these bigger venues won't be open.
So you guys have how many?
I think you're right.
Go ahead.
I mean, like stand-up comedy was kind of at a bit of a boiling point, like when coronavirus hit. Like some of the, I mean, we've never seen the amount of comedy specials coming out in the world as we were during that time period over the last few years. Like it's been, I mean, the amount of money that has been spent by Netflix and some of these places on comedy specials is extraordinary. Like, so we were definitely at a huge high there. And
none of that money was spent on us.
Yeah.
None of that money was spent on you or me, so I object to all of it.
Yeah, well, it definitely made a pretty significant difference in being able to, pack out comedy clubs. I mean, like when I worked at the Comedy Store as a doorman back in the mid 2000s, it was, no one cared about that comedy club. People used to talk about turning it into a parking lot. Like
we thought it was going to close.
Yeah. No one was going to the club. It was dead most of the time, and now it's, it is, you can't get a seat, any night of the week. It is just hot fire. The whole place, the lineups are insane. So, it's changed. It's definitely become a much bigger industry. Hopefully, after coronavirus, things will,
pick up again. Yeah.
We'll be in a new place and time, I guess.
So you guys have been performing for a few years now. Like, what would you say is your favorite venue to perform at?
Matt, where's your favorite place?
I would say I think in terms of, I've always been a big fan of clubs and just the way that clubs are set up, because there's a big difference between clubs and theaters in terms of like the energy in a room.
Yeah.
And to me, I would probably say the Ice House in Pasadena. That is just a club that's set up to make you succeed, essentially. Like, they do everything right in terms of making the performer get the focus of everybody's attention. However, the Improv is also a terrific club like that. I think those are probably my two favorite places, the Hollywood Improv and the Ice House in Pasadena, California. I mean, there's a lot of, we're lucky in Southern California. There's so many good stages and good clubs to do. But I think those are probably my two favorites.
Yeah, I would say Ice House in Pasadena is probably the comedy club that is literally physically structured in a way to make sure that the show is a success. Like,
yeah, we
we're
both
talking
recorded
down
albums
to
there,
like,
so.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's literally the building itself. The walls of the building are brick, so the echo of laughter is just, it's like performing in an echo box. So it's like you do a joke and it's just the laughter is bouncing off the walls, and which makes more people laugh and makes the room like a hotter room. So sometimes performing there feels like you're performing at the Apollo or something like this. Like, it's just an amazing experience. That place is great. I think the Comedy Store main room is a place where, like, when I've had a good set in the Comedy Store main room, that will hold me over for 6 months, where I'm like, okay, I never have to do anything ever again. This was everything. This is the best it's ever going to be, and that's the end, and that's how it's going to be, because it's just a very empowering stage. It feels like it's a very strong. The audience is really great, and the way that they structure the room is really cool. But it's one of the oldest stages and around, and I got a lot of love for it. But the Improv is the place that we've been doing the nighttime show, our podcast, live on stage at the Improv for years, like 3 years. We did it live on the stage there, and it was just extraordinary. The type of celebrities and people that we'd have on that stage, and was just so much fun. So I absolutely love the Improv. It was one of my favorite places in the world.
We'll talk about your podcast in a second, but really quick, Steven, you just had an album that just came out recently too, right?
I did.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
We recorded the album at the Ice House in Pasadena. We did the album there, and I had done about I had to kind of prepare for it. I used Matt's advice and performed literally every single day of the week on every single possible bizarre and weird show I could, just to prep myself and get myself ready for the I think I did 32 shows in the month of July of last year. Wow. to prep to do the August 3rd recording, and it was fun. I mean, I performed at like Hooters, at Dave & Buster's, at a yoga studio. I performed at the clubs, but then I also did like shows that were like teen tour shows where I was performing for teenagers, and some of those shows were great. Some of them were the worst shows I've ever done in my life. Like I did shows at the Ice House and at the Factory. I went down to Long Beach and performed at the Long Beach Laugh Factory. Like I tried to do. Oh, and I went to La Jolla Comedy Store with Mike Glazer from our show, and did some shows down there, and just kind of went to as many places and worked as much as I could, and it was really fun. And then the night of the album taping, Stormy Daniels showed up to the album taping, which was just kind of gave it like that extra little fun, energy for the night, where you're like, I was doing an impression of Trump on stage in front of Stormy Daniels, and that really kind of made my year.
That's awesome. Are you planning to do another album, you think, down the road?
I mean, it's gonna take a little while. This one, I got the offer to do the album a year before I recorded it, and I said I would do it, and then I spent like a full year kind of being like, I don't know when I'm ready to do it. Like I just didn't, like I don't, like you want it to be good, and you want to be proud of it, and I felt like I just wanted to like take the time, but I wish I could be like Jim Gaffigan and just put out another album the next year. Like that would be so awesome.
Yeah. Well, it seems like he does one every 6 months.
Oh my God.
It's like when you put out a new album as a comic, part of the reason is that you want to sort of retire some material so you don't have to keep doing it anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of part of the goal for any of us, is you put out something that has this material in a recording, then you can move on to start doing other things. And it takes a while to build the volume of material you need to put out another album. If you're somebody like Jim Gaffigan, you can walk into any room in America and get an hour and a half every night on stage. So it's a lot easier when you're that level to generate that kind of material.
Yeah. Oh my God. And he's nonstop touring all the time. Yeah. So wherever he is, like if he wants to take a section out of the night to try out new stuff, he can do that. And it's a little more like it can be a little more difficult when you're just here in Los Angeles, doing shows.
Don't forget, he's got to work a lot too. He's got like 10 kids.
Oh my God! Yeah, he's got to get out of the hill with his kids. College.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Hey, Steven, how did you get involved with the voiceover work?
Voiceover stuff came mostly out of. I mean, I do a lot of weird voices in my stand-up and in my act and stuff, and so like I at some point I started kind of getting seen for cartoons and for jobs like that, and then every once in a while I'll have some sort of big thing happen, like. But it's also like it's a weird, voiceover work is a super awesome thing, but it's also super weird. Like 2.5 years ago, I worked on Monster Hunter for Capcom as one of the, I think the character is called a Malinx or something like this. And it's like this thing. I spent like 3 days working on it, and that was the end. And it's been years, and literally about 2 weeks ago, IMDb listed that it's coming out later this year, and that it's going to come out as a film, like for streaming, like a streaming thing with Amazon, and that's like fantastic, because I haven't because you don't know, like sometimes you work on something and then maybe it'll see the light of day. Like I worked on White Fang with this company that was a company overseas. It was like a German filmmaking company, and then it premiered at Sundance, and they had cast Nick Offerman and Rashida Jones and Paul Giamatti in the movie, and me. And you're like, I'm like, oh, I'm in this thing, you know? So it's like you never really know 100% of when something is actually going to make it, you know, out into Netflix and into the world, and other times, you know. So it's a lot of just doing the gig and you know, hoping for the best that something happens with it, you know.
So now, you know, both, you know, you guys host a nighttime show. Like, how did you guys like start that podcast? Who came up with the idea for the show?
I mean, Matt, you know, I feel like there's the origin of the nighttime show very quickly is Tom Green had a show called Web-O-Vision, and he had to take off for a week, and he asked if I would take over for the week and bring my friends and do something. And so I called Matt, and I was like, hey, do you want to make this show together? And we'll do like a really big, weird, like talk show type thing. And it was fun. And we did this like big, crazy thing together, and it went really well. And I think we all had like a fun time doing it. And, you know, like Matt is like annoyingly smart. Like he just knows like everything about how everything works. And I know nothing about how nothing works. Like I know nothing. Like I know about 4 things, and that's it. You know, but Matt knows
musical theater,
way too much. What's that?
Yeah. I said if it's musical theater, Stephen Germain.
Yeah, musical theater, cartoons, Star Wars, action figures. These are the things I know stuff about. Like everything else, you know, I don't know. I call Matt way too much for questions about everything, how tools work, you know, how to make my computer not, you know, set on fire, you know, like so when I had been hosting a podcast with a girl named Kate Quigley called Date Fails, and she's a dear friend of mine, but we had kind of it was our versions of what we wanted to do on the podcast were very different, and I was like, oh man, I just, you know, like I'd love to do what's it called? I'd love to do a podcast, and that was, you know, with my friends, like another type of show. And we had been doing the nighttime show live as this like live, like fun, you know, stand-up comedy, like interview show, weird, wacky show. And then we were like, you know what? Right, Matt? We were like, let's try doing this as a podcast.
We were doing a live late night talk show, so think of, you know, like Conan O'Brien, but live, where all the guests were comedians. So they do stand up and then sit on a couch and we'd interview and play games. And then at the Improv at the time, they had a podcast network that was owned by the same people as the club. And they saw the show and they asked us if we'd be willing to do a podcast version of it. So we're like, yeah, sure. All right, let's try it. And we tried moving that format over to the podcast for like the first 5 episodes. And we're like, let's just interview people because it's way more interesting, I think.
Yeah.
So we started doing that.
You talk to, when you talk to comedians, like comedians, they've got fun, sometimes like fun stories and this and that.
Yeah.
But the origin story of a comedian is almost always the same. It's like, I wasn't doing stand-up, and then I was doing stand-up. And that's like basically it, as opposed to like talking to the zoo director for the Los Angeles Zoo, or talking to, you know, Ed Asner and finding out what his story is, or how he became him. Like, that's, I think, a big piece of why we wanted to do this is we are actually interested in the people we are talking to, and a lot of times we are learning along with the audience about what the lives of some fascinating people really are.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's another reason why I started this podcast also. Like, I've been doing this for 3 years now, and I've had some great guests on. Then I've had some guests where I'm like, I don't even know if I think they get forced to go on the show. Do you ever had that before, like, with some guests?
Oh, my God.
Yes. And I think Glickman, you'll know who I'm talking about. But I don't know. Should I name names, Steven? Should I name names?
Wait,
Should I tell him Tom Sizemore? Should I just tell him it's Tom Sizemore?
Yeah, Tom Sizemore was not happy to be there. Mark Boone Jr. from Batman Begins was not happy to be there.
Yeah.
Who else?
But I think we've been pretty lucky. We've had guests who are happy and they like telling us stories.
Yeah.
So for the most part, we've had great guests and we've been very happy with them. And even those shows, even though they're not that excited to be there, I think they still want to be in good shows. Like Tom Sizemore, well, I think we got more press from the Tom Sizemore episode than anything else we've ever done because he's a linguist. And he couldn't help himself with saying crazy stuff out the gate.
Yeah, so, he was pretty insane. I think sometimes you have people on who are like not they're not ready to talk.
Yeah.
Like Steven Weber, we were like, Steven Weber, we're such big fans. We loved Wings. And he was like, really? You loved Wings?
Come on.
We were like,
but he had other great stuff.
yeah, come on. Who doesn't love Wings?
Right.
Hey, you know what else? We love this other TV show you did. Man, you were so great on Mom. You really, really did a great job. And he was like, is this what we're going to do? And he was getting huge laughs kind of talking down on his own career the whole way through the interview. But it was fun. It was still it was still entertaining. It's a very fun show to listen to.
I mean, I grew up watching Wings with Cheers and Seinfeld, all those Thursday night shows. I don't know. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think it depends too. Like when you bring people on, sometimes when we do an interview with someone in their home, we get, they kind of forget that it's a podcast and they end up giving out very intimate and fascinating details about themselves. And then other times it's like, you have them on stage and, maybe they had a couple drinks before they came up on stage, and before you know it, they are, they're dropping all the info. They're telling because they're getting laughs, huge laughs. And so before you know it, they've revealed all sorts of crazy stuff about their lives. And
most of our guests are not used to live performance. So when we do the live version, whenever we can go back out and do a live show again, a lot of these people, they're not used to having a room full of people laughing at everything they say.
Right. And
I think they find it sort of intoxicating. Like as comedians, we're jaded to it. Like we just expect it. Like that's the job. But for people who are actors, they're usually on a soundstage somewhere and, the crew might laugh, but that's, 25 people and they're not in a room of 200 laughing with them as the focus of attention with all the laughter. I think they really enjoy it. So then they just sort of start leaning into it, and I think that also is another way of helping get people to open up.
Yeah.
Who do you think's been your best interview and guest that you've had on the show that sticks out?
Who's your favorite, Matt?
I think if I would say probably to me the best interview we've done was Michael Uslan, who's a name nobody's going to know, but he's probably a billionaire because he's the guy that in 1979 bought the rights to make Batman into a movie. And he's owned the rights to Batman movies ever since then. And he told us the story of how he got to that position to even be able to buy the rights to Batman, and then the struggle that he spent for 10 years in making the Batman movie that he wanted to make. and not just a comic farce movie like all the studios were willing to make a Batman movie if it was a comedy, but he wanted to make a serious, dark Batman, and that really changed filmmaking forever. Like all the big budget Marvel movies you see now, none of those would happen if it wasn't for the original 1989 Batman. So he talks about that whole process and his reluctance to Michael Keaton, even though Tim Burton wanted him, and how long it took to get Tim Burton, all that stuff. Like, that story was just fascinating to me as a fan of entertainment. And I haven't even seen a Batman movie since Batman 2, and I still think that's our best interview we've ever done. He was just that good.
Yeah, that Michael Uslan interview was it definitely stayed with me after it happened. The probably my favorite interview on the show that we've ever done is Bruce Valanche, because
so good.
Bruce Valanche, I'm a big fan of people that have these massive, long-running careers that are just extraordinary, where they've happened to run into everybody or work with everybody. Like, Bruce Valanche was Bette Midler's writer for everything Bette Midler has ever done. He gets brought in to write her dialogue and write her jokes and punch her stuff up. He's also the guy who wrote the Oscars, the Emmys, and the Tony Awards for 30 years. And then he also wrote the Star Wars Holiday Special and Paul Lynde's Halloween Special. So there's a moment in the interview with Bruce Valanche where he tells a story about working with Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch of the West, and Margaret Hamilton had told him a story about when she worked with W.C. Fields. So while listening to an episode of a podcast that was recorded in 2018,
12 or
you're hearing a story about W.C. Fields that no one else has ever heard. Mm-hmm. And that to me was that's the epitome of how awesome a show can be. Really, to me, that was okay, well, this is top tier kind of stuff. I mean, we've also had conversations with people that are shocking, where it stays with you for a long time. Like, we had Tyler Shields on the show, who shot the photograph of Kathy Griffin holding Donald Trump's severed head. And he's a very well-loved and very wealthy photographer who his photos, one photo print of his sells for in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
He's a huge deal. And he told us on our show, we were the first to hear about it, that a Postmates driver cut open a hamburger,
allegedly,
and right, and
yeah,
and put.
He thought that his food had been tampered with. Yeah, because he couldn't leave the house for 2 months after he had Secret Service outside his house. After that happened, just watching the place, he was getting death threats, and he thinks that a Postmates driver may have tampered with his food. And he told that story. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it got very that episode got very dark very quickly. I mean, when Janice Dickinson came on our show, she talked about
and this is before the Bill Cosby trial. So we talked to her before he'd actually gone to trial on the stuff. So the allegations were all out there, and we got to sort of talk to her about her thoughts on feeling vindication after she'd been ridiculed for years over telling these stories about things that had happened to her, and finally getting people to believe her is really interesting to hear.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. I mean, we've had probably my favorite performance that we've ever had, which was kind of our first real performance. It was pretty crazy. And I just remember because Mike Black, who is also on our show, turned to me on stage and was like, "Oh my God, we made this happen." And it was we had this idea that on our 100th episode of our podcast, it would be so fun if we could get Lisa Loeb to be at the show. And when we would do this bit, and this is such a stupid bit, but the idea would be, we go, we were trying to decide if when we hit 100 episodes that we were going to end doing the show here at the Improv, or if we were going to stay and keep doing the show here. And in honor of us deciding that we are going to stay, please welcome our guest, Lisa Loeb. And then Lisa Loeb came up and sang "Stay," her like big hit song from the 90s.
Yeah.
And it is to this day one of my favorite things that's ever happened on our show. Because it was like the amount of things that had to go right for Lisa Loeb to A, know who we are, and B, be down to come down to the Improv, and C, be down to sing the song that she's done a bajillion times. Like, it was just a lot of good things had to happen for that to.
And then you wind up going to her house to hand out Halloween candy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So my girlfriend was out of town for Halloween, and her and I have become friends. And I after doing this show, and I said, I don't know what to do on Halloween. What are you going to do? And she was like, "Why don't you come over to our house and hand out candy with me and my husband?" I was like, "Okay." So I spent a Halloween at Lisa Loeb's house giving out candy. It's pretty great.
Sounds like a drinking story. When you're drinking, you start telling people stories.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Put a finger down if,
That's right. Is there somebody that you would love to get on that you've been trying and it's just not working out, or you're hoping you can get them on someday?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, it took years, and I say years of bothering Doug Jones's manager to get Doug Jones from The Shape of Water and Hellboy to come on our show. It took years and years to get Michael Dorn from Worf from Star Trek: The Next Generation to come and do our show and do an interview. But there are people that are on our list that were just like, I mean, I've wanted to talk to Chuck Norris for so long. He's a big one for sure. I think there's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Stephen, let me point out that you are the one who brought up Star Trek, so I cannot be blamed this time.
Okay.
99% of the time it's usually me. But I think our white whale, the one that we want to get the most someday, and it's difficult because of age and other things and issues like that, even though we have connections with him, is Mel Brooks. I think he's the ultimate possible guest. And I think there's a chance we're going to get him someday, but the stars have to align. Everything has to work out the right possible way. But it's like we know Mel Brooks. Stephen knows him on a personal level. I've met him. Lovely man, fantastic stories. And it's just a matter of trying to make that happen. You can't just ask. You got to figure out the right way to ask for a guest like that. So it's sort of things like that going on where it's like, we got to find the right possible situation to maybe even ask to get him on. But besides him, it's William Shatner, and that's the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, Shatner would be a big deal. What's this? There's a couple.
I think Patrick Stewart is more likely because Picard's on now, so Patrick Stewart's a maybe.
Yeah, Patrick Stewart would be pretty great. We've always wanted to have Lance Henriksen on the show from Alien and Terminator, and we just had him last week. Which I
saw that, yeah.
Totally awesome. And then later this afternoon, we're doing an interview with Big Ed from 90 Day Fiancé, which kind of, if we're being honest, goes against our norm of what we normally go after, but we are, I think Matt and I both got really sucked into watching that show, and he's the big star of the season. And like it's always interesting, on our podcast to talk with people who are at the top of their game or have been at the top of their game, whatever their game is. So, like, even if, like we did an interview with, when we had Michael Dorn on, it's like Michael Dorn was at one point at the top of the acting, game. He was a character that, like, it doesn't matter what he's currently working on. I mean, it does matter. We, are fans of him, but it doesn't matter what he's currently working on. It's that he changed, the face of television forever by playing this character that is iconic. And it's the same kind of rule applies with someone like this, where right now he has captured the world's attention on this show. And this may be the big height of this guy's entire life. And so it'll be an interesting, chat to kind of see how that has affected his world and stuff, like those are, we don't do a lot of reality people, but when we do, it's got to be like the biggest possible person,
right.
Like, I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but like Farrah Abraham was on the show, and it was one of the freaking craziest interviews I think we've ever done.
We had the first interview she did after getting out of jail, because we'd agreed to put her on the show. Like, we weren't trying to get her. It was like a thing where a publicist was like, "Hey, look, I'm trying to get her on some shows that nobody wants to take her. Will you guys take her?" Like, fine, we'll interview Farrah Abraham, fine, because you get her with other good people. And then she goes out and gets arrested right before she's supposed to come on our show, and she gets out of jail the day before, and we were just lined up perfectly, so it worked out great.
Oh yeah, and when we finished the interview with her, the audio from that and she told us, she was like, "Take the audio from this interview and go give it to some people." And we, I mean, that interview got published by everybody. I mean, Vulture, Radar Online, People Magazine. I mean, I think we, and TMZ, I think we ended up with like 7 or 8 outlets picking up different stories of stuff that she said on the show. So, it's, what we try to do is, if we're going to have a Farrah Abraham on the show, then we also need to have, the guy who was the, prop designer on Terminator 2 on the next episode. You know what I mean? Like, we have to balance things out. You can't just have reality stars, or you will kill yourself.
So
you're, I think if you have 3 reality stars in a row, you get an ulcer.
Yeah.
I think that is. There's like a law in podcasting. I'm not 100% positive.
So it's funny because I've become friends with other podcasters that have similar shows and everything, and they're always trying to tell me to get reality stars on. I'm like, I don't know, I don't really watch reality show that much, but they're like, no, you got to get them. It's like they're going to make your numbers jump even higher because there's people who just sit there and just watch those shows.
They do. I'll tell you. I think we just had Chloe from Too Hot to Handle, which has been on the air for 3 weeks now on Netflix.
Netflix, yeah.
And the numbers on her show, we interviewed her, and that show's been out for 2 weeks. The numbers on her show puts it in our top 10 episodes of all time out of 175 episodes. Because she's like, oh, come on. Like, you put it out, and you're like, these numbers are going crazy. You're like, how did this happen? Like,
there's a moment in
nice
the
person,
interview.
but still. Yeah.
There's a moment in the interview. She kind of advertised herself on this reality show as being a bit of an idiot. Like, she's a very sweet person, but she like admittedly was like, I'm not really the brightest, cup of tea there is, or whatever. Like, she would say that kind of stuff on the reality show itself. So when we had her on, she was bragging on the Netflix show about how she had learned the word, what was the word?
I forget. There was a word. She's like, oh, that's another one now for the dictionary of Chloe.
Yeah, it was like she learned the word like agitated or something like that.
Or something like that.
And
yeah,
so,
I forget what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, so she was like, so then Matt goes, oh, yeah, I know that you learned the word agitated. You talked about it on television. So is there any new words that you've learned? And she said, yeah, I have actually. There's like a new word that I'm like super like proud of that I learned. And like, it's like the word for like whatever it is when like you don't, like when it's never happened before, like we're in a pandemic, right? Okay. So like, it's the word for like how that's never happened in the whole world. And we're like,
I can remember the word.
We're like unprecedented. She's like, that's the word I learned. We're like, well, you didn't learn it because you're like, this hurts my brain talking to you. But God bless her. You're just like, this is gold, but it's insane. So, I mean, to buff out, our to not have too many reality people. We had Jonathan Banks recently from Better Call Saul on the show, which was super badass. And then Friday we're interviewing Robbie Amell, who is the star of the show Upload on Amazon, and he's on the show The Flash. Yeah. So.
I almost had him on a couple months ago for the movie that they released on Netflix, Code, I think it was called. But things didn't work. Yeah, things didn't work out the way they were supposed to. So I'm trying to get him back on for his new show.
Well, hit him up now. Everybody's just sitting around at home trying to.
So how can the listeners
get back to work?
How can the listeners find your podcast? What outlets?
Just go to thenighttimeshow.com, and we have links to Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple, Google. Anywhere you get podcasts, you can find The Nighttime Show.
Yeah. Nighttime Show's available basically everywhere. We have an Amazon, what's it called? An Alexa app. Yep. So if you want to, put that into you want to download that app for your Alexa at home, you can listen to it. But you can get it everywhere.
You don't download it like that. It's fine.
What's that?
It's like you don't download an app to an Alexa. You just enable a skill. It's a whole tech thing. I'll explain it later.
See, this is why Matt needs to be here, because I don't know how that will work.
So
just look for the Alexa skill store. It'll show up. Yeah,
that's right. How can the listeners find you guys on social media?
You can go to me. I'm at Stephen Glickman, Stephen Glickman, Glickman, on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And Matt, if you want to get Matt, Matt, you're funny.
Links to everything are at funnymatt.com. Or if you were upset by anything I said today, let me know at mattwalkersucks.com.
Guys, this is fun. Thank you for coming on.
And people do. They do let him
I have lots of new content now after this week.
Yeah.
That's a wrap, everybody. That's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to the Man Cave Chronicles podcast.
I finally get my man cave.
You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the MCC Podcast and our website, themccpodcast.com. Until next time.